Welcome to another calming episode of Boring History for Sleep, a place for those who enjoy gentle storytelling and ambient sound, ideal for falling asleep to boring history. Whether you come here looking for a boring history video, a soft-spoken history documentary, or simply a relaxing story to lull you to sleep, you're in the right place. Tonight, we drift through the oddly ceremonial, sometimes absurd, and often surprisingly political world of royal birthdays. Now, when we think of birthdays today, we might imagine balloons, cakes, and perhaps the soft flicker of candlelight. But in centuries past, especially in royal courts, birthdays were so much more than just a celebration. They were spectacles of power, symbols of divine favor, tools of diplomacy, and at times, carefully orchestrated theater. In this boring history sleeper, we won't rush. We'll amble slowly through castle corridors, linger in banquet halls, and pause to observe the details. Details too mundane for the fast-paced world, but just perfect for falling asleep. Tonight's tale is less about drama and more about the soft rustle of silk, the distant tolling of a chapel bell, and the slow rhythm of life as it played out across royal courts. As we move through this boring history story, you'll find yourself gently lulled by the facts and rhythms of a past where time moved differently. We'll explore the daily lives of palace servants on royal birthdays, the lavish feasts and speeches given in honor of monarchs, and the curious rituals and relics of forgotten empires. This is the kind of relaxing history to fall asleep to, a history sleep story told slowly, steadily, softly. For fans of Roman history, archaeology, Tudor pomp, medieval custom, and old parchment textures, tonight's journey will feel like resting your head on a velvet pillow embroidered with heraldry and myth. So, settle in. The past isn't in a hurry, and neither are we. Now, take a deep breath, let your mind relax, and let's begin this soft-spoken journey through royal birthdays, starting with how a simple day of birth came to hold such significance in the halls of power. Imagine yourself waking in the early hours within the thick stone walls of a grand palace, somewhere in the heart of Tudor England perhaps, or nestled in the wooded hills of 18th century Bavaria. The world outside is just beginning to stir, the air still cool with the last sighs of night, and the corridors of the castle echo only with the quiet scurry of servants and the occasional creak of ancient timber. It is the king's or queen's birthday, and within these chambers, the day begins not with song or laughter, but with quiet precision. For the people who serve this royal house, the monarch's birthday is not a day of leisure. It is a day of structure, ceremony, and exacting preparation. In the lower quarters, kitchen fires are already lit, their smoke rising in slow spirals through chimney shafts worn smooth by decades of breathless days. The smell of wood smoke mingles with fresh bread and honeyed oats, and the rustle of linen skirts echoes off the walls as kitchen maids prepare breakfast trays with deliberate care. Everything must be in perfect order. On such a day, even a single misplaced spoon might offend a noble guest. Elsewhere, stable boys are brushing horses. Though the monarch may not ride today, it is important that the royal stables appear ready. Saddles are polished, manes are combed, and hooves are clean to a mirror shine. Even the animals know today is different. There is a stillness, a charged calm in the air. In the laundry rooms below the stone floors, crisp ceremonial garments are laid out. Robes of velvet and fur, buttons that gleam softly in the candlelight, collars so finely stitched that even the servants hesitate to touch them without gloves. These are not everyday garments, and they are handled with the same reverence as relics. Meanwhile, high above, in the monarch's private chambers, silence reigns. Here, everything is soft. The muted drape of curtains, the slow ticking of a long-case clock, the gentle sway of a tapestry in the breeze. The monarch may not rise for another hour or two, but already their birthday has begun to unfold, quietly, carefully, and with exacting care. And throughout the palace, a curious tension hums beneath the surface. Not fear exactly, Not excitement, either. Something in between. A sort of ceremonial nervousness. As if the very stones of the castle are bracing themselves for inspection. Royal birthdays, after all, are not merely personal. They are political. Every gesture today will be watched, noted, and interpreted. The guards at the gate stand a little straighter. The maids move a little faster. And everywhere, there is the quiet pressure of perfection. For now, however, the palace still belongs to the early hours. Still drowsy. Still gentle. The day has only just begun. By mid-morning, the palace has awakened fully. The soft quiet of dawn has given way to the more orchestrated quiet of court life. Still hushed, still deliberate, but alive now with presence and precision. Courtiers have begun to arrive. These are not merely guests. Courtiers are instruments in the great performance of monarchy. On a royal birthday, each one becomes a player in a slow, choreographed dance, rehearsing form if not in feeling. First come the stewards and master ushers, reviewing the day's agenda with gentle authority. They do not raise their voices. Instead, they murmur instructions as they glide down echoing hallways. A misplaced moment could ruin the flow of the entire ceremony. A noble who bows too soon, a toast that runs too long. Everything must be carefully timed. There's a quiet tyranny in such perfection. The Lord Chamberlain, clad in robes embroidered with the kingdom's crest, inspects the grand hall. Here, long tables have already been arranged, with silverware positioned just so, and flags of gold brocade hanging in languid folds above. No detail is too small to be beneath his attention. He pauses at a pewter goblet, adjusts its angle slightly, then nods and moves on. Even silence, it seems, has its geometry. Elsewhere, the royal herald prepares his scrolls. His role is symbolic, yet critical. In a voice meant to project not emotion, but order, he will later recite the lineage and titles of the monarch, reminding all in attendance, not of who the sovereign is today, but of what they represent across time. The recitation may be long and may lull some into a daze, but that is part of its charm. The slower the tempo, the more sacred the ritual. The ladies in waiting, too, take on specific roles. Some assist with dressing the monarch, helping lace the gown or fasten the collar of a ceremonial doublet. Others arrange flowers in private chambers or oversee the presentation of birthday tributes. Carefully selected gifts meant to signal loyalty, flattery, or subtle ambition. And then, of course, there are the silent watchers, the ambassadors, the scribes, the foreign dignitaries. Their presence is ceremonial, yes, but never passive. Each smile, each toast, each compliment is noted, weighed, and carried back to other courts. On this day, diplomacy wears a cloak of celebration. All of these figures move through the palace not in haste, but with steady, unhurried grace. The corridors echo not with shouting, but with the gentle rustle of silk, the soft tap of shoes on stone, the murmur of conversation too quiet to hear. It is a performance of quiet dignity. And as the great hall begins to fill and courtiers take their places, there is a strange serenity in the spectacle. For while the court is awake and alert, its rhythm is slow, like the turning of a clock too ancient to tick. A clock that chimes not minutes, but centuries. The ceremony is almost ready to begin. By early afternoon, the palace has settled into the grand rhythm of the birthday feast. The grand hall glows with candlelight and filtered sun, light shimmering on polished silver platters and flickering gently across the faces of nobility arranged in careful rows. The scent of roast meat mingles with stewed fruits, herbs, and warm bread. The clatter of cutlery, though restrained, creates a gentle background hum, like the soft murmur of a distant brook. At the head of the long table sits the monarch, draped in ceremonial attire, perhaps velvet the color of oxblood, trimmed in fur or gold thread, or perhaps lighter silks for warmer climates, embroidered with emblems of lineage and power. A birthday crown may rest lightly upon the head, not the heavy state diadem, but something softer, ornamental, symbolic. Everything, even the attire, speaks in layers. As guests eat, servants move with practiced grace, refilling goblets with wine or spice cider. Platters are carried in with silent reverence. Peacocks roasted with their feathers reattached, towers of candied fruits, pies hiding game birds within game birds, like edible nesting dolls. These are not merely dishes, they are statements. To the sleepy observer, it may appear as nothing more than a long, elaborate meal, but within this banquet lies a subtle theater of power. Where one is seated matters deeply. A duke seated too far from the monarch may read it as a slight. A foreign envoy placed near the royal family might interpret it as favor or as a test. Each toast is more than polite noise. It is an opportunity to affirm loyalty or quietly assert rank. Even laughter, when it arises, is measured. Too loud and it might seem crass, too soft and it might suggest disinterest. And yet, beneath all this quiet strategy, there is warmth too. The monarch may smile gently at an old friend seated nearby. A child may be given a sugared plum by a kind aunt. A bard may recite a verse written just for the occasion, drawing tired applause from guests already lulled by the third course. Even rulers are allowed nostalgia. As the feast progresses, entertainment weaves its way between the courses. Minstrels strum lutes in soft rhythms, their melodies simple and repetitive, like the lull of the sea. A masked jester offers riddles, more clever than funny, while acrobats or dancers perform brief interludes on the marble floor. Nothing raucous, nothing sudden, just a slow unfolding of courtly entertainment, designed as much to pacify as to delight. And as the final dishes are cleared away and the last toast is made, a gentle satisfaction settles over the hall. Not joy exactly, but a kind of completeness. The ceremony has been observed, the monarch has been honored, and the palace can now begin to exhale. Outside, the afternoon sun drifts lower behind the battlements. The celebration, while still technically in motion, begins to soften at the edges. It will fade, as all royal things do, into quiet. But even as the hall begins to empty, servants clearing platters with barely a sound, the memory of the birthday lingers, not because of the food or the music, but because of how carefully everything was arranged. Every detail, every gesture. It was not just a feast, it was an echo of monarchy itself. Grand, silent, symbolic. Let us drift now to the autumn of the year 1594. The leaves outside the city of London had just begun to fall in crisp, papery waves, and the River Thames flowed with a sluggish calm beneath the late-year sky. In Whitehall Palace, one of the grandest royal residences of the Tudor age, preparations were underway for a particularly public celebration, the 61st birthday of Queen Elizabeth I. Unlike the quieter observances we previously explored, this birthday was designed to be seen not just by lords and ladies of the court, but by foreign envoys, favorite poets, ambitious courtiers, and even the broader public. Through rumor, through spectacle, to the carefully crafted ripple of royal image, Elizabeth, by now deep into her reign, understood the value of performance. Her rule had weathered war, rebellion, and court intrigue. Her birthday, therefore, was not merely a personal milestone. It was a reminder that she endured, and that the nation endured with her. The celebrations began in the early morning with a formal mass, held in the Chapel Royal. The Queen, draped in white and gold, processed slowly down the aisle, flanked by attendants in Tudor green. The scent of beeswax candles and pressed lavender filled the air. No one spoke as the liturgy unfolded, not from awe, but from the quiet weight of ceremony. It was less a religious service, and more a reaffirmation of divine favor. Later that day, in the Great Hall, the Queen's inner circle gathered for the reading of tributes. These were not gifts in the usual sense. They were poems, allegorical plays, speeches crafted in elaborate flattery. One compared her to Astrea, the virgin goddess of justice, another to the phoenix, eternal and pure. The queen listened in silence, her face unreadable beneath the painted white mask she often wore in later years. It was said that when one poem pleased her, she nodded, but gently, almost imperceptibly. That small nod would be talked about in court for days. Outside the palace, crowds gathered, though they could not enter the royal hall. They listened for music drifting from the windows. Some merchants displayed portraits of the queen in their shop fronts, idealized images with high collars and glowing skin. Others sold trinkets said to bear her likeness. Bakers shaped sweetmeats in the form of crowned E. It was a birthday in which the monarch became symbol and the symbol myth, but perhaps the most striking feature of the celebration came near dusk. On the lawn beside the palace, a tableau vivant, a living picture, was staged. Actors, dressed as Britannia, time, and various virtues, stood frozen in symbolic poses for nearly an hour, while the queen and her court looked on. No one moved, not even the queen. The moment stretched on like a painting in real time. Then, as the sun began to set behind the chimneys of the palace, Elizabeth rose from her seat, raised her hand, and nodded once again. The performance ended. The message was received. The queen, like the tableau, remained eternal, unchanging, revered. That night, music continued in the palace, and torches were lit along the river. But the real celebration had already happened. Quietly, symbolically, beneath layers of costume and ceremony. It was, in many ways, a perfect birthday, not for its revelry, but for how it wove power into stillness and myth into everyday life. Royal birthdays, though draped in beauty and ceremony, were rarely simple acts of personal celebration. Beneath the music and feasts lay a quiet undercurrent of politics, an unspoken language of power, favor, and control. Imagine yourself seated near the back of a long candlelit hall, the flicker of torchlight dancing on polished shields above. You are a minor noble or a foreign envoy, observing the queen's birthday from a respectful distance. You raise your goblet when others do. You smile at the right moments, but mostly you watch. And what you see tells you more about the kingdom's balance of power than any treaty or council ever could. In monarchies where bloodlines rule the map, birthdays mark more than survival. They reaffirm the monarch's divine right to rule. A successful public birthday, complete with loyal nobles, elaborate performances, and finely tuned tributes, signaled that all was in order, that the realm was stable, that the sovereign was beloved. And yet, these displays often mask silent tensions. A birthday banquet might feature the conspicuous absence of a particular duke. A toast might mention one alliance but omit another. A gift might carry an uncomfortable message, too expensive, and it could be seen as bribery, too plain, and it could offend. There were countless ways to misstep. Even the birthday gifts themselves were never just presents. In Elizabethan England, gifts were catalogued, inspected, and recorded in meticulous lists. A pearl-encrusted fan from one courtier, a Latin poem handwritten on vellum from another, a miniature portrait tucked in a locket. These offerings were measured against each other and read like political essays in disguise. Those who gave generously might gain access to the privy chamber. Those who offered poorly, whether an object or gesture, might find themselves gently nudged to political margins. In other courts, like Versailles under Louis XIV, the birthday could be a mirror of absolutism. Louis, the self-styled Sun King, celebrated his birthdays not merely as a personal affair, but as state occasions. The court would parade through mirrored halls, dress in matching colors, and perform choreographed dances to display unity and order. It was a birthday not of sentiment, but a spectacle, a ballet of obedience. For those close to power, A royal birthday could be both an opportunity and a test. Ambitious courtiers rehearsed their greetings. Musicians composed flattering ballads. Even jesters carefully timed their jokes, mindful that a single misstep might bring years of consequences. And for the monarch, the birthday served a different function. It reminded all who attended, and perhaps even the sovereign themselves, that power was not an accident of birth, but something reinforced again and again through ritual, symbolism, and silent agreement. Even as the music played and the halls echoed with polite laughter, beneath the surface, eyes watched, ears listened, and history, ever quiet, took notes. As we drift deeper into the quieter corners of history, we begin to notice something peculiar. Not all royal birthdays were remembered. In fact, many were forgotten altogether, intentionally overlooked, or carefully erased from court calendars. Imagine, if you will, paging through a royal household ledger from the 14th century. You pass entry after entry of feasts, tournaments, and saints' days, but every so often there is silence where a birthday should be. No record, no expense, no mention at all. Why would a monarch's birthday go uncelebrated? Sometimes the reason was mourning. If a death had occurred recently, perhaps the queen mother, a favorite sibling, or a beloved advisor, the monarch might cancel all festivities as a gesture of solemnity. These gaps in celebration were quiet, but deeply symbolic. They signaled humility, reverence, or even political prudence in times of unrest. Other times, birthdays were deliberately ignored for reasons of image. Some rulers, especially those with uncertain lineage or contested legitimacy, avoided birthday celebrations to prevent uncomfortable questions about their birth. King Richard III of England, whose claim to the throne was riddled with controversy, rarely celebrated his own birthday in public. It was as if acknowledging it too loudly might summon the ghosts of doubters past. There are also curious instances of monarchs who simply disliked birthday celebrations. Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, preferred introspection to ceremony. On several occasions, he is noted to have spent his birthday in quiet solitude, walking monastery grounds or writing letters to his children. To him, a birthday was not an occasion for fanfare. It was a moment to reflect on duty and mortality. And then there were those birthdays that were remembered, but only by others. In letters between diplomats or nobles, we sometimes find references to birthday tributes that never reached the monarch directly. A gift sent, but never acknowledged. A poem read in a private salon, but not at court. These partial celebrations tell a different story. Of shifting favor, of fractured relationships, of celebrations that lived outside official memory. Perhaps most mysteriously, in the archives of several European courts, there exist references to birthdays that were celebrated once, but never again. Why? Was the day unlucky? Did something go wrong? The records do not say. The music has long faded. The goblets have long been cleared. All that remains is silence and questions. In these forgotten birthdays, we glimpse the fragile nature of historical memory. Not everything was recorded. Not everything was meant to be. And sometimes, absence speaks louder than celebration. As the candle burns low in the corner of our imaginary archive, we close the ledger and sit in that silence. Not everything in royal life was grand. Some days passed like shadows. Some birthdays never came again. And yet, even in their absence, they remind us of something very human. That even kings and queens, draped in velvet and surrounded by ceremony, were not always celebrated. Sometimes they, too, simply grew older in the quiet. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a riverbank, not in England or France, but in the cradle of civilization itself. The air is dry, the soil baked and cracked by centuries of sun. In the distance, a temple rises from the earth like a quiet stone hymn. This is ancient Mesopotamia, Around 3000 BC, the concept of time is beginning to take shape, and with it, slowly, the idea of the birthday is stirring. The earliest references to birthdays are not personal in the way we think of them today. They are tied not to individuals, but to gods and kings. In Sumerian temples, rituals were sometimes held on what was believed to be the divine birth date of a deity. These days were marked by offerings, usually grain, incense, or beer, and whispered prayers. It wasn't about celebration. It was about continuity, about aligning mortal time with sacred time. Later, in ancient Egypt, the birthday began to take on more familiar forms, though only for those at the very top. Pharaohs had two birthdays, the day of their physical birth and the day they were reborn as gods upon ascending the throne. It was this latter day that held greater importance. Statues were unveiled, small festivals arranged, and rituals conducted to reaffirm the ruler's divine link. Commoners didn't celebrate birthdays. Time, for most, was seasonal, not personal. The ancient Greeks brought us closer to what we now recognize. They celebrated the birth of gods with monthly offerings, particularly to Artemis, goddess of the moon. Her followers would offer honey cakes adorned with candles, lit to send prayers skyward. There is some speculation, though lightly supported, that this is where our modern birthday cake with candles may have its earliest echoes. Even in these early traditions, the flame was symbolic, a flickering bridge between the mortal and the divine. In ancient Rome, the birthday finally entered the civilian world, though still with caveats. Freeborn men, especially of wealth or rank, might celebrate their dies natalies with banquets, speeches, or small tokens exchanged. The emperor's birthday, however, was another matter entirely. Declared a public holiday in many regions, it was observed with parades, animal sacrifices, and theatrical performances. Altars were decorated with flowers, and coins were sometimes minted in the emperor's honor. Again, we see the blending of personal and political, a pattern that would persist for centuries. Interestingly, women's birthdays in Rome were far less commonly recorded or celebrated. Social position, gender, and status all determined whether one's birth was noted, let alone observed. To be born was one thing. To be worth remembering was another. And in ancient China, birthday observances were often rooted in ancestral reverence. Rather than focusing on the individual, they emphasized family lineage and cosmic balance. Birthdays of great philosophers or rulers might be quietly marked at shrines, while everyday birthdays passed without mention. Time was not linear, but cyclical, measured by seasons, dynasties, and stars. Across these ancient worlds, we find a common thread. The birthday was not yet a private celebration of self, but a public ritual of meaning, a thread woven into religion, power, and timekeeping. Something quieter, but perhaps more profound. So when we blow out candles today, in the comfort of a well-lit room, it is worth remembering that the custom may have begun in a temple under torchlight, with a soft prayer offered not for joy, but for order. Imagine a quiet storeroom deep within a museum. Dusty shelves lined with fragments of clay tablets, ancient scrolls, and faded figurines. The air smells faintly of linen and old ink. These are not grand relics of conquest or kingship. They are quieter things, personal, ordinary, and among them, archaeologists have uncovered the softest echoes of birthdays past. Let's begin with clay tablets from Babylon, inscribed with cuneiform. Some record grain inventories. Others track celestial events, but a few, very few, contain notations of ceremonial days linked to a ruler's birth. One such tablet from the reign of King Nabonidus refers to an offering of dates and incense to be made on the day of the king's nativity. A single line in a slab of hardened earth, but in that line, a whisper that someone's birth mattered enough to be remembered. In ancient Roman ruins, we find more material remains. Terracotta lamps bearing birthday inscriptions have been unearthed in homes near Pompeii. Simple designs etched with phrases like, "Felix dies Natalie's happy birthday," or images of Hercules, thought to represent strength and protection for the coming year. These were not grand statues, but everyday items held lit and perhaps given as tokens among friends. Fragments of papyrus from Roman Egypt reveal birthday poems, commissioned or copied as tributes. One reads like a soft chant, "Another year the fates have spun, your thread remains unbroken." Such writings were delicate, easily lost to time, but their survival suggests that even in the ancient world, words were a gift. Meanwhile, in a tomb in northern China, archaeologists discovered lacquerware bowls inscribed with dates believed to mark birth years, not royalty, but scholars or minor officials. These bowls were decorated modestly, but with care. They weren't merely tools. They were keepsakes. Their presence in a tomb suggests that birthdays were becoming part of identity, something to be carried forward, even into the afterlife. In medieval Europe, birthday symbols evolved alongside religious calendars. Illuminated manuscripts contain occasional notes in the margins, "Born on this day," beside the name of a local noble or a young monk. More commonly, saints' days were recorded and individuals named after them. It wasn't uncommon for a child's real birthday to be forgotten, replaced by the feast day of their namesake. And so, the person was absorbed into the sacred. One fascinating artifact, a 15th century book of hours, includes an entry added by a later hand, written in faded brown ink. "My son Richard was born this day," in candlelight, as frost clung to the window. No fanfare, just a line of quiet memory. Across all these objects, a subtle pattern emerges, the shift from collective ritual to individual meaning, from grand altars to terracotta tokens, from kings and gods to sons and daughters. History, once written in stone, had begun to appear in ink on birthday letters and inside lockets. We see, too, the emergence of symbols that persist even now. Candles for hope, cakes for sweetness, tokens for memory. They were not always presented in the ways we know today, but their spirit of marking life quietly and sincerely has endured. Archaeology, then, does not shout the history of birthdays. It murmurs it. A bowl, a lamp, a scribbled note. Gentle pieces of a larger puzzle. And each one, no matter how small, tells us something both historical and deeply human. That even in a world without calendars on the wall or party hats on the table, the act of remembering someone's beginning mattered. Birthdays, as we've seen, began as grand rituals of gods and kings. But over time, they've blossomed into quieter customs across cultures around the world. Not always marked with cakes or candles. Not always celebrated at all. But wherever humans counted years, they found ways to observe the miracle of return. The return of the same day, the same season, year after year. Let us begin in ancient India, where Vedic traditions approach birthdays through the lens of ritual and alignment. A child's first birthday, called Ayashya Homam, was celebrated with fire ceremony, prayers for long life, and the chanting of mantras. Gifts were modest, often fruit or rice, and the focus was on spiritual blessings, not material joy. In older families, this practice continues still, the flames flickering softly as the day unfolds in prayerful stillness. In Japan, birthdays were once less important than coming-of-age rituals. Traditionally, everyone aged together on New Year's Day, rather than on the anniversary of their birth. A child turning 7, a young adult turning 20. These ages were cause for quiet celebration, often marked with simple clothing ceremonies, symbolic foods, and a moment of reflection at a shrine. It was less a celebration of self, and more a recognition of growing into society. In Navajo culture, the focus of life events is on relationships and balance, not personal milestones. When birthdays are acknowledged, they are done so quietly, often with food shared among family and friends, a story passed down, or a moment of appreciation. What matters most is not the number of years, but the harmony one maintains with nature and community. In Korea, the first birthday, or dole, is celebrated with specific rituals. A table is set with symbolic items: thread, money, rice, pencils, and the child is allowed to choose. The chosen item is said to foretell their future: long life, wealth, intelligence, or stability. The moment is quiet, yet full of meaning. Even laughter is hushed, not for solemnity, but for respect. In Jewish tradition, the bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah at age 13 marks the child's passage into religious responsibility. Though not technically a birthday party, it often coincides with birthday and is accompanied by calm ceremony, reading, and gentle celebration among family. It is not a day for indulgence. It is a day for acknowledgement. And in rural Scandinavia, particularly centuries ago, birthdays were not widely celebrated at all. In some villages, the only recognition might come in the form of a slightly larger portion at supper or a soft hummed at dusk. For these communities, survival was celebration enough. Time passed slowly, and the turning of years was folded gently into the rhythm of seasons, of snowfall, of harvest. Even today, around the world, birthday traditions vary in tone and emphasis. Some are grand, others hushed. Some focus on the self, others on the soul. Some bring laughter, some bring quiet tears. But beneath them all lies the same tender impulse: to notice, to say, in some small way, you are here. Again, still, that noticing may come with a candle, a prayer, a poem, a moment of silence, or nothing at all. But in every culture, it speaks gently of time, of belonging, and of how memory is made, slowly, quietly, year by year. Let us return once more to the medieval world. Not the one of shimmering palaces and embroidered cloaks, but the world of thatched cottages, of muddy roads, of hearth fires and worn shoes. While noble birthdays were wrapped in spectacle, embroidered with layers of meaning and protocol, the birthdays of the common folk passed far more quietly, sometimes unnoticed at all. Imagine a small village in 14th century England. The air is thick with the scent of damp straw and hearth smoke. A child is born the last days of March, just as the thaw begins to soften the ground. His mother remembers the day, but she will not write it down. There is no calendar in the cottage, no parchment to mark it. The local priest may enter the baptism date in the church ledger, but that, too, may be lost. And so, for most peasants, birthdays were less about celebration and more about memory. Oral, imprecise, carried in stories rather than on paper. If that same child grows older and survives the gauntlet of youth, fevers, crop failures, accidents, his family might loosely mark his name day, the feast day of the saint for whom he is named. This might include a larger piece of bread, a shared bowl of stewed fruit, or the rare indulgence of honey. But there would be no cake, no candles, no music beyond the crackling of fire, and perhaps the quiet singing of a family tune. By contrast, in the castles and great houses, birthdays, especially those of heirs, were chronicled with formality. Ledgers were updated, astrologers were consulted, nurses recorded the hour of birth. If the child was born into a noble house, their birthday might be celebrated annually with music, poetry, and carefully selected guests. Gifts for noble children were not toys in the modern sense. They might receive miniature books of psalms, a carved wooden animal, or a small tapestry embroidered with their family crest. And as they grew older, the expectations around the birthday shifted. It became less about joy and more about image. For noble women, birthdays often marked eligibility for marriage. A girl turning 12 or 14 might receive fine gloves, a new gown, or simply a whisper reminder of her changing role in the household. There was celebration, but also tension, a soft drumbeat beneath the surface. Among common folk, especially in later centuries, birthdays gained meaning through seasonal rituals. A child born near harvest might always associate their birthday with the apple gathering. One born near Easter might receive an egg, painted if times were good, plain if not. These traditions were less about the date and more about the rhythm of life. And yet, despite the vast gulf in wealth and literacy, something curious persisted in both worlds. The desire to remember. A mother in a cottage and a duchess in a palace might both pause, in their own quiet ways, to note that a year had passed, that a child had grown. That time was still turning. Perhaps a song was sung. Perhaps a hand was held. Perhaps nothing was said at all. But in that pause, in that recognition, we find the thread that links them. The rich, the poor, the known, the forgotten, all looking at a face they love and thinking, you are here. Again, as we drifted through centuries of celebration, it may have seemed that birthdays were sweet, sentimental affairs. And sometimes they were. But for monarchs, emperors, and rulers, birthdays often carried a far heavier weight. They were tools, carefully wielded, of soft power. Imagine yourself in the sunlit courtyard of a Renaissance palace. Pennants flutter, musicians tune their lutes, and the scent of sweet herbs drifts on the breeze. You might think you're attending a pleasant garden festival, but every detail, every color, every song, every invited guest is a line in a silent scripted control. Let's begin in Imperial Rome, where the emperor's birthday was often declared a public holiday. This wasn't simply for festivity. It was a declaration of loyalty. Temples issued commemorative coins of the emperor's face. Public games were held, and citizens toasted with state-issued wine. Participation wasn't optional. To skip the celebration was to mark oneself as suspicious. In France under Louis XV, court painters were sometimes instructed to create new portraits of the king in honor of his birthday, images that would then be distributed, copied, and hung in government buildings and noble homes. These portraits were idealized, smiling, strong, noble. They didn't just mark a birthday. They reaffirmed authority. They said, this is your ruler. This is who you admire. Meanwhile, in Tsar's Russia, birthday processions of the imperial family often took the form of carefully staged public parades. Soldiers marched in sequence. Factory workers were lined along roadsides to wave handkerchiefs, and children were given paper flags to hold. From above, the Tsarina might wave from a balcony, poised, distant, and serene. The moment was photographed, written about, and described in schools. It was not a celebration. It was a lesson. Birthdays were also useful in cementing dynastic continuity. In monarchies facing unrest, the birthday of a young prince or princess could be broadcast widely to signal strength, future stability, and hope. Poems were commissioned. Plays were performed in the child's honor. Even foreign ambassadors were invited, reminded through theater of the strength and permanence of the crown. In some eras, royal birthdays even became tools of myth-making. Stories of miraculous births, celestial omens, or wise sayings uttered by the child monarch were quietly circulated. These weren't lies. They were narrative embroidery, a way of softening history into legend. It is worth noting, too, that access to the birthday was political. In many courts, only select nobles were permitted to attend royal birthday events. Being invited meant you were in favor. Being excluded sent a subtle, undeniable message. Even the gifts, lavish, symbolic, and often presented with rehearsed speeches, were public declarations of allegiance. A jewel-encrusted pennant wasn't just a present. It was a performance of loyalty, meant to be seen and remembered. And for the monarch themselves, the birthday was rarely restful. Each word, each gesture, each moment of eye contact was part of a larger choreography. One misstep, could change a narrative. One slight could echo through generations. So the birthday, dressed in ribbons and song, was not always soft. It was sharp, a velvet glove covering a careful grip. But even so, underneath all that performance, behind the robes and masks and speeches, there may still have been a moment of quiet, a glance in the mirror, a candle extinguished, a single thought, perhaps another year. As the centuries turned and empires waned, so too did the need for birthdays to dazzle. With the rise of the middle class, the spread of printing, and the slow but steady erosion of absolute monarchies, the birthday, once a matter of spectacle and state, began to return to something quieter, something closer to home. Imagine yourself in a modest Victorian parlor at the turn of the 20th century. A girl sits by the fire in a simple dress, a tiny silver brooch in her palm. It is her 12th birthday. The brooch came wrapped in linen and ribbon, tucked into a small wooden box. Her mother made the cake herself, plain, sweet, with dried cherries, and her father offered a verse he copied from a book of poetry. There are no photographers, no banners, no formal gowns, and yet to her, this day is perfect, personal, hers. This was the quiet revolution of the modern birthday. It became less about public recognition and more about intimate remembrance. The invention of the birthday card in the late 19th century marked a significant cultural shift. Cards, once expensive and rare, became affordable, mass-printed, and deeply cherished. They allowed for feelings to be shared across distance, and for those without wealth to participate in meaningful celebration. By the early 20th century, with urbanization and the rise of school culture, birthdays became points of recognition among peers. Classmates sang songs, brought little gifts, or simply said, "Happy birthday." These moments, small as they were, anchored people to one another. Even more quietly, birthdays began appearing in diaries and journals, sometimes with only a line. "Papa's birthday today. He smiled when I gave him the pipe." Or, "Sarah's 9 now. She says she feels old." And yet, even as birthdays became personal, traces of their grand past remained, like ghosts in the wallpaper. Royal families still marked birthdays with public announcements. Politicians issued statements. Celebrities received tributes. But for most people, birthdays were now folded gently into the fabric of family. In post-war households, birthday cakes became more elaborate, songs more standardized, and parties more common. The famous "Happy Birthday to You," copyrighted in the early 20th century, became a cultural ritual. And for a moment, however brief, it felt as if everyone, everywhere, celebrated in the same way. But even in this new age of balloons and frosted cakes, something softer survived. The pause, the quiet recognition, the small, sometimes wordless moment where someone looked at you and simply thought, "I'm glad you were born." Today, in our world of digital calendars and notifications, birthdays may arrive with chime, a phone screen filled with emojis, or a flurry of messages from people we barely know. But the most meaningful moments remain the quietest. A handwritten card, a call from a parent, a whispered, "Thank you for being here." And so, as we draw the curtains on this long history, we return to where we began, not with kings or festivals, but with a simple idea: that time is precious, that people matter, that each turning of a year, no matter how quietly marked, is worth remembering. So now, dear listener, here we are. We wander through palaces and pastures, temples and tenements, following the quiet footsteps of birthdays long gone. We've seen gods honored with honey cakes, emperors toasted with parades, and children marked by the turning of seasons rather than the ticking of clocks. And through it all, one truth remains softly lit: to be remembered is to be held, whether by a crowd waving banners or by one hand offering a slice of cake in a quiet kitchen. The intention is the same: to notice, to pause, to mark that someone arrived and stayed. In every forgotten ledger, every crumbling coin, every scribbled diary entry or whispered folk song, we find the heartbeat of birthday history. Not loud, but steady. You may not remember the names of ancient queens or Roman rituals. That's okay. What matters is the rhythm we've settled into together. A rhythm older than calendars, softer than ceremony. And perhaps, when your own birthday comes, whether marked with music or silence, you'll think, just for a moment, of all those who came before, of the candles they lit, of the time they noticed, because in the end, birthdays are not about years. They're about light, however briefly it burns, and how, in the great darkness of history, someone once saw it and smiled